The courtroom is so quiet, you can hear fabric move when people breathe. Then the forensic expert stands, calm as a man explaining weather. He lifts a pointer toward a blown-up crime scene photo and says, in a voice so steady it feels pre-approved by the universe, the forensic evidence places him at the scene. And just like that, the air changes. You are sitting right there, listening to words you do not fully understand, but you understand their weight. You understand what happens when a stranger says something technical with enough confidence. You know you were never there. You know that, but the way he says it makes even your own innocence sound small inside your head. The most terrifying thing is not a man who lies in court. It is a man who is wrong and speaks with the face of someone who believes he is telling the truth. When science picks a side, a person is dead. Maybe it is a murder. Maybe a fire turned lethal. Maybe violence ended in a body on a floor and a family left staring at a door that will never open again. The police do not have a clean eyewitness. They do not have a clear camera. They do not have a motive strong enough to close the case with certainty. But they have forensic evidence. And once forensic evidence enters the room, everything changes. You are no longer a weak suspect held together by suspicion and hunches. You become the person science has pointed at. The one whose name suddenly sounds less like a possibility and more like a conclusion. You thought truth had to be proven, but inside that courtroom, all someone has to do is call something science, and the whole system is ready to kneel. Level 1, the arrest. They come for you days later, or maybe weeks. By then, the investigation has already hardened around your absence, like plaster setting around a shape that does not belong there. The detectives do not act uncertain. They do not carry the hesitation of men still searching. They behave like they already crossed the finish line, and you are just the paperwork at the end. They arrest you because something at the scene supposedly fits. A mark, a pattern, a sample. An expert says it is consistent with you. Maybe it is a bite mark, maybe a hair comparison, maybe bloodstain pattern analysis, maybe burn patterns in a fire scene interpreted as proof of arson. Old forensic disciplines, dressed up in modern language, walking into your life like they own it. At first, you think there has been a mistake, the kind that gets fixed once a sane person looks closely. But in the interrogation room, you start to understand what this really is. They are not there to discover the truth. They are there to confirm what the forensic story has already told them. So every question comes loaded. Why were you there? How did you bite the victim? How do you explain the blood? You set the fire to cover your tracks, didn't you? The more you deny it, the more they study your face with that exhausted, contemptuous look people save for bad liars. Your innocence is not being evaluated. It is being filtered through a theory that has already decided what you are. Level 2, the language. You can't fight later. A public defender or court-appointed lawyer walks you through the file. He does it carefully, but not gently. Because he knows something you are only beginning to feel. The forensic evidence may not be as solid as the prosecution makes it sound, but that may not matter enough. The real danger is not just the data, it is the language wrapped around it. Microscopic consistency. Match characteristics, patterns consistent with, reasonable scientific certainty. Those phrases do not sound like uncertainty. They sound like a door locking. They sound like your future being converted into technical vocabulary too polished for ordinary people to resist. You ask the obvious question, is it actually accurate? Your lawyer does not answer right away. Maybe because he cannot. Maybe because he knows the scariest part is not whether the science is weak. It is that jurors do not hear science by its level of precision. They hear it by how intelligent it sounds, and that is how you begin to lose. Not because the truth failed, not because your life meant less, but because specialized language entered the room wearing authority, and everything human about your story suddenly felt flimsy beside it. You are not buried by evidence. You are buried by the way evidence is translated into something that sounds impossible to doubt. Level 3, the expert. Then comes the expert. He is not theatrical. He does not need to be. That is what makes him dangerous. Then he takes the stand with the composure of a man who has done this many times before, a man who knows that certainty is most persuasive when it never raises its voice. He clicks through slides. Enlarged photographs, arrows, highlighted areas, clean labels, controlled language, a performance so restrained it feels like mathematics. He explains that the bite mark is consistent with your teeth, that the hair found at the scene cannot exclude you, that the bloodstain pattern places the attacker in that exact position, that the burn indicators show the fire was intentionally set. The jury stares at the images like they are looking at truth itself. You stare at them like you are watching a foreign language erase your life in real time. Your defense attorney tries to push back, but there is no equally polished expert on your side, no matching budget, no counterweight with the same white-collar gravity. One man says science, the other says, in essence, maybe not. And in a courtroom, those two things are never the same weight. Level 4, guilty sounds technical. By the time the prosecution closes, they have done something almost elegant in its cruelty. They have fused morality with technical language. They are not just saying you had reason, they are saying science confirmed your presence, science confirmed your role, science confirmed what kind of person you must be. That is what makes the case feel clean. Modern, civilized, not rumor, not instinct, not the old brutality of accusation, evidence, and that is exactly why the jury is more likely to trust it, because they do not believe they are guessing. They believe they are listening to something objective, a system purged of emotion and human error. Then you speak, or your story is told. You say where you were, or you explain the night. You try to hand them the ordinary texture of reality, the places, the times, the details only a real life contains, but your words sound human. His words sound mechanical, and in that room, these machines always beat people. The verdict lands with a single word that does not sound loud until it detonates inside your chest. Guilty. Level 5. The sentence. Sentencing is worse in a quieter way. The judge speaks in measured tones, as if balance and reason are being served by the destruction of your future. 18 years, 20, 25, maybe more. The numbers do not even feel real at first. They feel too large to fit inside a human mind. Then come the phrases that cut deeper than anger ever could. The evidence was compelling. The science was clear. That is what breaks something in you. Not just that they are taking your life, but that even the person doing it believes he is acting rationally, sensibly, responsibly. You are led away with more than the ache of injustice. You are dragged into a far colder terror than that. How do you fight a system that thinks objectivity itself has spoken? Level 6. Life inside a conclusion. Prison is not just walls and schedules and metal and noise. For you, it is life inside a finished conclusion. Outside, people assume there is nothing left to discuss. Your case had forensic evidence. And in the public imagination, forensic evidence is where doubt goes to die. To them, your conviction is not a tragedy or a controversy. It is a solved equation. You start reading the case file to survive the hours. At first, it is just something to do, a way to keep your mind from collapsing inward. But slowly, line by line, the language begins to change shape. Consistent with does not mean unique. Cannot exclude does not mean it had to be you. What sounded definitive in court begins to reveal all its cracks when stripped of the voice that presented it. And then comes the deeper shock. Whole forensic disciplines, once treated like hard truth, have histories full of overstatement, subjectivity, bad assumptions, weak validation, and people testifying beyond what the science could honestly support. So your identity begins to shift. You are no longer just a man saying, "I'm innocent." You become a man learning how certainty gets manufactured. Level 7. The science changes. Years pass. Enough years to alter faces, funerals, marriages, technologies, the lives of everyone except the one locked in place. And while you sit inside that frozen sentence, the scientific world outside begins to move. New reports come out. Scientific review boards re-examine old forensic methods. Independent organizations start asking questions that should have been asked long before your trial. How reliable is this field really? What was actually tested? What was merely assumed? How much of the testimony was science, and how much was performance disguised as science? Suddenly, things once presented to juries as near certain are described with colder, more honest words. Overstated, misleading, unsupported, lacking scientific foundation. That is the turn no one saw coming. You are not rescued by sympathy, not at first. You are not saved because the world becomes kinder. You are saved because real science finally grows strong enough to expose fake certainty. An appellate lawyer or an innocence organization or an investigative reporter starts digging into your case. And the most important thing is not what they ask. They do not begin with, "Are you sure you're innocent?" They begin with, "What basis did that expert actually have to speak that strongly?" Years go by, and at last the question is no longer whether you were at the scene. It is why anyone ever dared to sound so sure when they never truly knew. Level 8. The case comes apart. Once the case is reopened and examined layer by layer, the structure begins to fail exactly where it once looked strongest. The bite mark evidence does not have the specificity it claimed. Hair comparison testimony was inflated far beyond what the underlying science could support. Bloodstain interpretation turns out to be vulnerable to subjectivity, context, and the bias of the person reading it. Fire indicators once taught as proof of arson were based on outdated beliefs that later research undermined. And then you read the old trial transcript again, not as a condemned man clinging to hope, but as someone who finally sees the mechanism clearly. The conviction was never built on pure data. It was built on confidence, on a witness stepping past the edge of what the evidence allowed and speaking as though the ground kept going. Maybe the expert was not wrong about every observation. Maybe some narrow parts were real, but he went beyond them. And that excess, those extra miles of certainty, with no scientific road beneath them, that is what stole decades of your life. That is the part that makes people furious when they finally see it, because the system did not merely make a mistake. It rewarded the performance of certainty. Level 9, the reversal. Then, at last, the reversal begins. A new hearing, a successful appeal, a judge willing, and finally, to look at the old testimony under newer light. This time, the experts speak differently. No theatrical collapse, no dramatic confession, no sudden transformation into a movie, just precision. The old method was not sufficient to support that conclusion. The confidence level presented to the jury had no reliable basis. The jury was led to believe this was hard science when it was not. There may be other evidence that helps unravel the case, or there may not, and that is what makes it even more chilling. Sometimes a conviction falls apart, not because new truth arrives in brilliant color, but because people stop pretending the old certainty was real. The conviction is vacated, or the prosecution chooses not to try again. Either way, the wall that held you finally cracks. Level 10. Freedom after false certainty. When you walk out, freedom does not feel like restoration. It feels like stepping into a world that kept moving while your life was pinned under glass. People do not remember the technical details that destroyed you. They remember the headline. They remember you were once convicted of murder, or arson, or a violent death. The correction never spreads with the same force as the accusation. Innocence is quieter, less marketable, less dramatic than guilt. So you emerge into daylight, carrying absence like luggage. Years gone. Relationships broken, work vanished, nerves stretched so tight your body no longer understands what safety feels like. And the most painful part is this: you were not destroyed by some simple clerical error, not by a typo, not by one openly corrupt villain. You were destroyed by a mistake packaged too beautifully, destroyed by a lab coat and a lie that sounded smart. In the end, you keep coming back to that man on the witness stand, the expert with the laser pointer, the measured tone, the neat slides, the absolute gaze. Maybe he never hated you. Maybe he believed he was helping justice. Thus maybe he went home that night and slept well, convinced he had done the responsible thing, and somehow that makes it worse. Because it means a human life can be crushed not only by malice, but by misplaced confidence inside a system that worships the appearance of knowledge. A system so dazzled by technical language, so hungry for clean conclusions, that it mistakes overstatement for truth and confidence for proof. People still like to believe science saves the innocent. Sometimes it does. But sometimes the first thing that buries you is not truth at all. It is a weaker, inflated, arrogant version of truth dressed in a suit, holding a laser pointer, and introduced to the jury as evidence.